never had a plan. I'm Jeff. Like you said, I'm from San Francisco. For those of you who have seen me before, I did this thing called a periodic table of Google Analytics. If you're looking to learn Google Analytics, this is a good resource. And actually, I'm re-releasing it pretty soon here in about a month, and it's going to have 150 elements in it, up from about 60 in the first version. So we're going pretty crazy with that. I had a lot of fun last night. Hopefully you all enjoyed that as well. And maybe tonight we'll do the same thing. But today we're going to talk about strategy. What is strategy? Such an interesting word that gets thrown around a lot. Just listened to a few panels and people are talking about strategy whether we know it or not. So I'm going to go back to this whole Vin Diesel thing and sort of tie it together. What is strategy? So has anybody seen the movie The Fast and the Furious? The first one, or any of them? I don't know, car chases, explosions. It's really fun. Terrible movie, like not good acting or anything, but entertaining. And so in the first one, they're racing. Vin Diesel and Paul Walker are racing, and Paul Walker gets ahead at the beginning, and then at the end he flames out and doesn't even make it to the finish line because he burns his car out. And he goes to Vin Diesel at the end. He goes, "Hey, dude, I almost had you." Vin Diesel, the veteran, the wise guy, he's like, "You didn't have me." He's like, "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, I think I know everything." And Vin Diesel says, "You never had your car." And that's sort of how I look at a lot of what we're doing in digital marketing is we never had a plan. So we think we almost had it. We think we're going towards the finish line. We think that we're about to break through, have something great happen. But the reality is we never had a plan. There was no chance of it ever succeeding because eventually it just got caught up with us. So how do we fix that? How do we take a better approach to finding these things? How do we find how to do a better job? It all comes back down to this thing, strategy, right? So what is strategy? I do some teaching in the United States, and one of my students asked me, how do I describe strategy? What is strategy to you? And I was like, trying to come up with a picture, and I was like, it's like a chessboard. It's like the game of chess. Strategy is the player of chess. And then within there, you have pieces that can do different things. You have the king, which is the end of the game. You have the queen, which is a very powerful piece. You have pawns, but you have all these different pieces of the board. And those are the tactics that we have. So if strategy is, I'm playing a game, the tactics that we have, the things we're able to do are the different pieces. Each piece has its own capability. Each piece has strengths and weaknesses. The strategy piece of it is understanding what those pieces do and using it in order to win the game. It's to take these things in there. And there's two different teams, right? There's your pieces, and then there's your competitors. Understanding what your competitors are doing as well. So when you play that chess game, you're really being strategy. You're doing strategy. How does this work into the world of analytics? Well, right now I've noticed that a lot of our focus is on this. This piece. What can this piece do? New features within this piece. Things about the pieces. Tactics. Google Tag Manager, things that we can do, cool stuff we can do. A lot of these things are focused on how do we get it done, or we have people who don't even know what game they're playing. They're clueless. They don't even know how to use the chessboard. So we end up with shit like this. Pardon my language, I hope there's no kids here. A survey, a pop-up. You're in the middle of doing something and you get interrupted. Your first visit to the page, within 5 seconds of visiting on the page, you see crap like this. Or you're trying to change your password, you're trying to change your account, and they're like, how's your experience? It's terrible because you keep on doing these. So about 3 months ago, I was just on a rant about these pop-ups, and I started saving them, and now I have a shitty pop-ups folder that's just overflowing with screenshots of terrible experiences. Somebody trying to ask me how I'm doing when I don't even know how I'm doing yet. That's not strategy. That's tactics. That's doing things that don't really make sense. So here's 3 ways that we're going to talk about how do we be more strategic with the way that we approach digital marketing and analytics. First thing is strategies win championships, tactics win games. Next thing we're going to say is just because it's cool doesn't mean that it's a strategy. And then you got to sell your results. And actually, a lot of what I'm going to say here, I noticed that it was echoed in the last 2 presentations. So Peter covered some of this stuff really well. And then the panel was fantastic about how do you sell into the organization? How do you find your champion? And things like that. We'll just reiterate some of those points and hammer it home as we go through it. And a reminder, if you want, I'm talking about a lot of different things. I have a little document you can download, bit.ly/strategic analytics. If you want to download this, you can go to that website. So talking about strategies win championships, how does this work? So things we think are awesome on our website may not be nearly as awesome to our users. They might actually alienate them. It might piss them off. So here's one where I was wondering whether my homepage is doing a good job, so I put a heat map on there. Great for me, right, to see how people are going through there, but what if it slows down my website? What if it makes things worse for the user? Pop-ups. I can hammer that home all day. These things are stupid. They're terrible in many ways. I'll tell you when it is useful in a little bit here. All the JavaScript, it's hard to see that shot, but that's actually all the scripts. That's like a very small fraction of all the scripts that are running on one of my websites because I wanted to do all these cool things. I have like 6 analytics tools running on my website at any given time. I have tools that help me monitor the speed of my website. I have tools that do all these different things. Every one of those I add on top of it in order to see, basically to fulfill my needs. But what ends up happening is the first script might not be a problem. Second script might not be a problem. By the time you add 6 analytics tools, you might see some serious performance issues. And so you keep on adding these things thinking they're harmless. A tag is harmless. Google Tag Manager makes it so easy to add tags to our website. We're doing very harmless things. Eventually, you start getting stuff like this. So I'm embarrassed by this, but this is this page speed grade for one of my websites, a D. And I think I'm doing everything right. I'm doing all these things because basically, by doing too much, by overloading and taking advantage of these things that are cool for me, I'm making my users suffer. And that can be a reality. A lot of times we do these things innocently. We think that we're doing a little thing, we're adding on top of it, and ultimately we're breaking the experience because it's not a strategic point of view. We're doing it because it's cool, because it looks interesting. Another one, we want to email you. Has anybody ever been to QuickSprout before? Neil Patel's website? So when you log into that website, you get a pop-up. And then when you close the pop-up, you get a second pop-up. Is that a good user experience? I'm sure that he has a great rate. He'll probably write something, how do you increase the number of emails you get by 7,000%? By never letting them get out of it. But that's not necessarily something that's good for the user. It's sort of annoying when you look at it from that perspective. So did we give this person a good user experience, or did we just sort of shake our own hand, pat ourselves in the back? No, we get a bad experience because we put ourselves in front of our users. So here's a framework that I've started to adopt, and I've had to do this more and more as I'm starting my own business from the ground up, and that is I need to start with where I want to be and then work backwards. So start with the outcome. Here's what it looks like to be successful. I hear a lot of people complaining about clients and how they just don't get it and they don't understand what's going on. The client gets it. You don't get the client. The difference here is the client has certain objectives, and that is to make money for their business. We have objectives, which is to get people to buy our services and to get people interested in what we're saying. A little bit different objectives. So when they don't get it, they just don't get what you're going after, but they get their business. So how do you do this? You have to start with what you want to get to and then work your way backwards. Let's put it in some practical terms. So this is an example of something that I don't recommend, doing something because it's cool. You need to do things because the reason why you should have a survey is because I want to reduce the number of unhappy customers to my website, is I think there's revenue potential from that. If I can reduce the number of unhappy customers, I can increase the amount of revenue we have by a significant amount. That's the only reason why you should have a survey on your website. You should never have it otherwise, because if you can't prove the value of having it, then there's no value at all. It's adding something on top of it, which maybe that one thing is harmless in a vacuum, but when you do this for 10 different technologies and all these different vendors, that's when you start to have a problem. So I'm going to tell you an example. A goal. Say that a website wants to have 5,000 new signups by the end of 2015. It's a lofty goal, right? Well, if you want to get to that point, you can't just suddenly go from 0 to 5,000 signups. You really need to take an approach to say, if I want to get to 5,000, how is this going to work? So the first thing I do is I set a target. If I want 5,000 new users, I either need to have an even distribution of 416 users a month, or I need to go 352 and then have a 3% increase month over month by doing these different things. And I have this budget that's in there. So you have to set some kind of target to say, here's what we're going after. At the end of the year, here's what we need to achieve. Once you're going after it, you say, what are the tactics that we need to get there? So there's a lot of different ways that you can get users to sign up on your website. We saw a few of them. We saw the pop-up window that QuickSprout has. We've seen a lot of different ways to do it, but these are all different things that I've considered for getting new users for one of my websites. A lot of different tactics in there, right? And a lot of those things we believe in. A lot of us do these things. Those are the things that you need to do in concert in order to increase your user base. You need to have teams. One thing I'm realizing that it's really difficult to do all those tactics on your own. That's when you start to establish teams. You have to have people on your team, on your side, whether it's a vendor, which a lot of us are vendors to our clients, or you need to have employees or people on your team in order to do these different items that you're looking at. And then you need to choose your tools. You notice how we said we're choosing our tools last? Because the tools are not a very essential part of our strategy. The tools are a way to make our strategy more efficient. They're a way to do things more with less time, but they're not necessarily an essential part of the strategy. They're just a piece of the puzzle. Another goal, if we want to reduce our customer complaints, you start with the same framework. Our target is that if we can go down from 200 to 100 complaints, we're going to have an impact of $50,000. That's the value we're going after. Okay, well, here's some tactics you could do. You do a website survey. You do redesign your navigation. You do some A/B split testing. You do make your site search engine better. You do these different things. Because if you can, and then you get these teams together that are involved in order to improve that process, and then you choose your tools. Because if you can do this thing right, then you just represented $50,000 for your company. And so if you can put the resources into this thing to make it work, your company could now make more money, or they can have a savings of money, whatever it is. It ultimately becomes profit in the end. Whether you're saving $50,000 or you're making $50,000, it's really whether it comes to the bottom line. Is that the profitability of the company? Does that make sense to people, how we're looking at this? Basically, you start with what I need to do, and then you need to work backwards. And then and you look at this thing, a website survey is very valid here. This is one of the few cases where you should probably be doing a website survey. Another one, if I want to improve our conversion rate by 50%, a lot of talks about A/B split testing. I think that the way that we need to attack that problem is, if we can do conversion optimization, if we look at our 2% conversion rate, increase it to 3% or whatever the number is, we can make $1 million. If you go in and you say, if I can do this, I'll make you $1 million to a company, they will give you the budget. It's not that they don't understand you or that they don't get it. The difference is the client actually wants to make $1 million. That's all they care about. And you look to somebody, I heard a bunch of people talking about C-level executives, VPs, and things like that. Do you know they get compensated? Base salary, which is good, and a percentage of the profitability of the company. So if you can make them profit, you can make them extra $1 million, that might be $10,000 in their pocket. If you can make them $10 million, it might be $100,000 in their pocket. It's exponential how much more money they make if they can have more profitability of their company. And so when we talk about they don't get it, you don't get them. Knowing that somebody makes more money when you make them more profit of the company is a huge revelation, because now you can change the approach to say, we're going to make you more money. So that's all that people really care about in many levels is, what can you do to make me more money? And then the investment becomes justified because we have a revenue potential tied to it. So keep that in mind as you go through and try to sell things into organizations. Their compensation structure is not about spending money with you, it's about making profit with you. So who uses this strategy? You might be like, who's this talking head who's talking about this? I know Amazon, I've talked to some people, and Amazon.com might not be as popular in certain areas, but it's huge in the United States. $75 billion in revenue. It's the largest online retailer in the United States by far. It's actually like 4 times bigger than the next one. And this is actually an article from 2006, which means that this has been going on for a long time. But Amazon's always a case study about building a business the right way, a data-driven culture, a data-driven company, those different things. Well, basically, their CTO says, the first thing you do if you want to get a project approved at Amazon.com is you write a press release for the launch of the product. So you start with the end, right? You start with the outcome. And that is, here's what happens when I do this product. Here's the actual press release. And if enough people in the organization say, yeah, I would buy that, or I think that's a good idea, or that'd be fun to work on, that project gets funded. And then when that project gets funded, you work the plan all the way to the point where you do the components in order to get to the point where that press release is something you can actually put out there in the wild. And that seems to have worked very well for them. They're a data-driven company, and they do things like this. They start with the end and work backwards. And a lot of this, and then the process of just improving it. Has anybody ever heard of the 80-20 rule of marketing? It's from a guy named Perry Marshall. 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. I firmly believe in that you can't do everything well. So it's usually a core of things that you do that make the best effort. And then the opposite of that, right? 20% of the effort of the results come from 80% of your effort. So we're very inefficient with what we're doing in marketing. There's all these adages that half my money is wasted, I don't know which half. 80% of the things that we do are pretty wasteful. They have very little impact. It's a very small number of things we do that have a big impact. So understand that when you make decisions. So this comes from Perry Marshall's book. You can, I made a bit.ly link if you wanted to look at that book, but it's got some great reviews. And so strategy is eliminating the 80% that doesn't work. It's trimming the fat, if you will. It's getting rid of the stuff that doesn't really matter for you. Next thing, cool is not a strategy. And I feel bad because I was picking on some people on Twitter about this, but ultimately, just because it's cool doesn't mean that it fits into your strategy, and let's talk about what that means. So I love Google Analytics about as proportionate to as bad as I am at Photoshop. But that was me as William Wallace from Braveheart. But just because it's in Google Analytics doesn't mean we need to use it, all right? So there's a lot of cool things that are in Google Analytics, a lot of cool stuff that we're hearing about, but not every company needs them. So universal analytics. Before implementing universal analytics, you should always ask, how does universal analytics fit into my strategy? So what are the new features of universal analytics? We have user ID tracking, we have more custom dimensions, we have enhanced e-commerce, we have a few things in there. About 5% of all Google Analytics users need those things. About 95% of them probably could get by without upgrading their code base. So it's not necessarily a strategic move unless you can say these features that they just released are imperative to my business or imperative to my plan to make more money. Maybe you don't need to upgrade right away. It's something to understand there. Google Tag Manager, it's cool. What's the main value proposition of that? You're taking the bureaucracy out of the company. You're making it so that instead of having to go through a really long development cycle, you can get stuff to market sooner and have a little bit more foolproof, or not necessarily foolproof, but a little bit more consistent implementations with what you're doing. I happen to love Google Tag Manager, but it's not a strategy. Now, the reason why you'd want to implement Google Tag Manager is if you say, on average, it takes us 6 months to get something implemented, or 6 days, and we can get this to speed down to 15 minutes or two hours, whatever that number is, we can reduce this, then it fits your strategy, right? Because if you need to get to 5,000 signups by the end of this year, and you lose 6 months because you can't even get the crap on your website to track it, then this very much fits into your strategy. So understand that Google Tag Manager is something that can fit in there, and I think that for many people it does fit in there, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, not just because you don't like something, just because you're bored with whatever else you're looking at. Weather, this is a good one. So I actually had some clients where if I would have worked on them when the Tag Manager weather as a custom dimension would have been out there, it would have been life-changing. Home improvement industry, where if there's a storm that comes into somewhere, then the roofs get hail damage and things like that. I could have used this, and I could have actually predicted how many leads we'd get based on weather. And we could even do certain customization. We could do all kinds of stuff with that dimension. Well, not every company needs that, right? There's a few people that can use this every day, vacations, hotels, companies that weather does affect what they're doing. Maybe not everybody else needs it. So just because it's cool doesn't mean that you need it, but it can be revolutionary if that is your strategy. Demographics. I think everybody should be paying attention to the demographics of what they're doing on the web, but it might not fit into your strategy if you haven't defined who your ideal customer is, if you haven't said, here's the people we want to go out and find. So you do need to understand this is a tool in your toolbox, but it doesn't always work in every situation. You got to understand how it can work for you. Benchmarks. Benchmarking is important, but maybe it doesn't matter to some people. Maybe there's nothing really for them to benchmark. And then attribution. You hear everybody talking about attribution and how that's the new thing. I think less than 5% of people can make real sense out of attribution. Less than 5% of any Google Analytics user has enough channels that they need to know what the channels are doing. But then again, if you are doing a lot of marketing and you employ this 80-20 principle, attribution modeling is very important, right? Because this is what tells you what the 20% of your efforts drive the most results. So that's what attribution modeling can do for you. But if you don't have enough marketing to even know what those if you don't even have 5 tactics in the market, then it's not as important for you because it's all basically going through one thing. And just remember, it's not just Google. So I have a Google bias because I started using those tools and I've been using them for a long time. But the same thing works for everything. So how does AT Internet fit into your strategy? It could very well turn out that when you go through this thing and you lay it all out there, it's a much better fit for your strategy. And in many cases, I bet you that it is. Same with, anybody ever use Mixpanel? How does that fit into your strategy? Now, one thing that's really interesting to me is that sometimes understanding what the tool is best at is just looking at their website. So they say actions speak louder than page views. So what is Mixpanel claiming to do better than Google Analytics? If you're looking at page views, maybe Google Analytics are one tool. If you want to know what the actions of your users are, this is the tool that they want. And so maybe you choose your tool and they're just laying it out for you. That's what they think is their value proposition. Snowplow, we talked about that last night. How does that fit into your strategy? And it's not just analytics tools. How does Optimizely fit into your strategy? How does any one of these tools fit into your strategy? You choose these last because the tool, I know they're important. They're very important to what we're doing, and it's actually the most day-to-day interaction we have with anything that I'm talking about is the tools. But make sure that it fits in with what you're doing, with the overall strategy that you set, and you'll have a lot better results. And here's just a tweetable throwaway quote. The dream of having one tool is just that, a dream. There's more than one tool to do what you need to do, and it's actually essential to do that. So when you look at this whole approach, apply this filter. Is your benefit that you're getting, is it greater than the customer experience? Is it greater than the customer's happiness with what you're doing? And in many cases, it's still, yeah. I don't mind alienating my customers because I'm getting the benefit that I need out of this thing. So I have to do that. It's a necessary evil to get that done. The last thing, selling your results. It's funny because I was asked, I had this in the presentation, of course, but I was asked this yesterday, are we selling? Everybody in this room is selling at all times, whether you like it or not. You don't need to be a salesperson. You don't need to be salesy, but we're all selling. Whether we're selling our expertise, whether we're selling our seat at the table, whether we're selling ourselves that we're good enough to even be here to do these things, we're all selling at some point in time. You just got to understand that. But I think there's a certain way that you can sell that can do really well for you. So I say to people, is what you're saying boardroom worthy? And the boardroom's sort of a cliche. I'm like, is there really a boardroom? Well, last year I actually ended up in a boardroom that looked like this. Wood paneled. The CEO of the company was there. It was a Friday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm presenting to them about how to create a data-driven organization. He's wearing a bow tie. I'm the most underdressed person in the room with a suit and tie. Stuffy room, insurance company. And I needed to try to convince them that they needed to become more data-driven. Created this presentation. It was in Iowa, so I showed them the farm and everything like that. And here's the approach that I took to make it so that I could get noticed, so that I can at least have something. And guess what? I didn't talk about tactics at all. No tactics, right? Trying to get to the point where, from a strategic perspective, they understand the value in analytics. So I took these approaches. What are the objectives of the company? I needed to understand what they wanted, not what I wanted. They want to hear the benefits they're going to receive. So what's the benefits? That's a perfect marketing, right? You do benefits over features. And then the CFO, they want to know numbers. You need to predict your value, and then you just got to get rid of all the jargon. Don't use terms that somebody can easily understand. Don't use jargon. If you're going to mention KPIs, make sure you explain what a KPI is before you use that. So almost no acronyms should ever go into a presentation with somebody who's outside of marketing, who's not drinking the same Kool-Aid that we are. No acronyms. And the other thing is, what if a company, you're saying, you need to become data-driven? That's easy for us to say, right? To sit here and say, hey, you got to become data-driven. But you know what provides more value than that? Third-party justification. So if an organization's been doing, like Amazon, it's not tough to convince them that they need to be data-driven. It's not tough to convince them that they need that culture because it exists. But what about a company that just barely is on the internet, that barely even does any of this stuff? You need to find stuff like this. That headline is killer, right? If you were at a company and you saw this headline, wouldn't you at least start to notice? Wouldn't you be like, wow, this is like legit. If we're not data-driven, we don't perform as well as the other people. That's a wake-up call, isn't it? just in one line. Sometimes third parties are who we need to lean on in order to get our ideas across because they're the ones who are saying it, and we can remove ourselves from that situation. Return on analytics, that's something that Avinash and Jesse Nichols worked on, where you can put in some numbers in your marketing budget, and it will actually tell you investing in analytics will give you this much of a result. And so you can download a template from their website, RO Analytics, and you can fill it in there. You can try to create a data-driven argument for why this even is important in the first place. And then presenting. Something that people in analytics and analysts don't like to do very often, right? It's like, oh man, I don't know. And it may be a stereotype, but I didn't used to like to present. I had to force myself to get up and talk in front of people, and it took years in order to really become comfortable with it. But it all started with sitting in front of clients and showing them a report that I had created, showing them what was going on. And I had to learn a lot along the way. But eventually I came up with this format that I think works pretty well. So I'm going to share this with you, and you can download it as well. So what you say is important. What you don't say is even more important. Just because we know all the detail doesn't mean we need to give that. Because the more detail you give, the more questions you get about it. And so if you're spitting out details, people are going to find little things and ask about that. You ever been in a meeting where you prepare this deck and you have this great analysis, and then somebody looks at a number and they go, what does that number mean? And then it derails the entire meeting, and you spend an hour and a half talking about some stupid fucking number on the chart when it has nothing to do with what you prepared? So that's happened to me so many times that I've had to learn, stop giving them fuel. Stop giving them things to pick apart. Reveal the information. Being an analyst is a position of power. When you're delivering a report, you're the person right there. Everybody's focused on you. I'm in a position of power right now in this room. You're all looking at me, right? So it's up to me to make sure that I take advantage of that, to harness it, to lead you in the direction that I want to go. Same thing goes if you're presenting to your clients or if you're doing anything. So here's some other advice. Use visuals. You notice I don't use a lot of bullet points in this stuff. It's mostly visuals. Don't show your work. That's really important. We talked about finding your champion. That's huge. Make sure you find your champion. Assume that somebody's going to receive it offline. This is probably the biggest tip that I have for people. Assume that what you're presenting is not only going to be shown in that room where you're there, where you can explain it, but that's going to make it to at least, for every one person who's in the room, 10 people at a big company are going to see it. I've had my reports at large companies go to 50 to 100 different marketing people. And I don't have the opportunity, especially when they're not even in the same state as me or the same country as me, to actually go and explain what that meant to every single one of them. So if this thing is getting spread throughout the world, through all these different people, I need to make sure the answer is contained in that slide. You need to anticipate what the questions are going to be and even provide the answers to it. And when you're the smartest person in the room, act dumb. I know a lot of people on here are probably the smartest person in the room when they go to clients or when they do things. You're probably the smartest person in the room. We're very brilliant people that work in analytics. Don't come across as a threat to people. Even if you know the answer, let people come to it at their own natural conclusion, because if you're forceful or if you're acting like you're a know-it-all, you're a threat. And people don't want threats, especially in big organizations. If they think you're a threat, they're actually going to go out of their way in order to submarine what you're working on. So it actually works against you to be the smartest person or the smartest acting person. I know that's counterintuitive because we all want to prove that we're brilliant people. Just be comfortable with the fact that you're brilliant. And I know it takes time to get to that point. Just know that you're the one who's smart. You're the one that has the answers, and then use it to your advantage. Set the tone for what you want to show people. And make sure that you're showing solutions and not problems. People get enough problems every day. You have a social contract with them. If you're bringing them more problems, they're going to check out right away. They're gone. You're going to lose them forever. So here's this crude template that I created that you can download and play around with yourself. So I put an agenda, these items in there, we'll talk about each of them. Executive summary is the most important piece to me because it literally is all that an executive will read. You ever been in a meeting where I've been in meetings in other states and just other areas, just it'd be like going to another country for most of you. Spent all time preparing for it. I stayed up all night creating the presentation, did all these different things. I show up in the room. The VP is in the room, and there's a bunch of marketing people, directors, managers. The VP flips through your presentation and leaves within 15 minutes, 10 minutes if you're, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And they do that because they only have so much time. And so if you don't have that executive summary in there, they're not going to find any value in what you're doing. So basically, every layer of your report should, and I've seen people have graphics on this, but basically every layer of your report, assume that it starts with the highest level person, and then each time that you peel back and you go further into your report, that's as people go lower in the organization. So your executive summary is for executives, that's as far as they're going to get. The next level, your key KPIs, that's probably like a director level. That's probably, it might be as far as they get, is how are we doing versus the KPIs that we set in the organization. A summary of how we're doing overall. Then you might get down to the managers. That might be the only people left in the room. Or maybe there's an organization that actually gives you the time that you think you deserve. I've not been in a lot of, or worked with a lot of big companies that give you the amount of time that you put into it. It's not usually a very reciprocating thing. Then maybe it's down to certain people, you know, and put an observation and implication on every single slide. Explain to people what they're seeing so they don't come to false conclusions and so they don't come up to the conclusions themselves because they don't know this stuff as intimately as you do. So give them the answer in plain writing. I know it's hard to do that because you don't want to steal your thunder, you don't want to steal the big reveal, but it's very important, especially when this stuff gets shipped out to 10 times more people than those that are in the room with you in the first place. And then you can get into your supporting evidence. Not everybody's going to care about that. You might get some questions in the presentation about that. You can show them the evidence if you need to, but a lot of times you don't even need to get that far. It's really just your background material, and then the appendix, that's where they put the stuff that you actually care about. Always gets relegated to the appendix. That's the actual work that you did. That's showing your work, but you put that at the end. And that was hard for me to learn. I was very combative with people who I was working with who told me that I was giving away too much detail. But it took years, many years, many presentations, many things not happening how I wanted to before I started to come around to this format that I thought worked really well for what I need. So if you go to bit.ly/reporting template, that's all lowercase, you can download that. And so this, one of the people that I work with downloaded this template, and all they did was they put their logo in the upper right-hand corner. That's a newspaper publication in Minnesota. It's like the 15th biggest one in the US. He took the report, did everything that I put in there, just changed the numbers to fit the company. It made it to the CEO. And so within like 2 weeks of this guy taking the new job, he took over reporting, filled out this template, and the CEO saw it within 2 weeks. How many of us have a chance to get in front of the CEO that early in what we're doing in a big company? Now, I'm not guaranteeing this type of stuff will happen, but understanding what they need is a very important aspect to get there. And so that helps you get to the point where you deserve to be in front of the CEO because you're talking to them in levels that they can understand. So get an audience, get the right audience, and you can grow your ideas. So here's just a recap of what we talked about. So strategic marketing process. You establish your goals, set your targets, agree on your tactics, form teams, choose tools, work your plan, sell your results, rinse and repeat, reflect and repeat. That's the 80-20 piece. That's where you decide, after you do this thing one time, what's the 80% of the results coming from? What are the efforts that we're doing that are getting the most results? You either chop off the other stuff or you modify your plan, and then you just keep on going. You go to the next level. And if you can adopt this type of an approach, you're now a strategic analyst. Not that different than what we're doing right now, is it? This might just be one incremental step in all that you do. It might be an extra hour a week in what you do. That's the only difference between strategic and not strategic marketing, is that you're starting with where you want to be and you're working your way there. Because strategy, it's not about the pieces you have, even though the pieces are pretty cool sometimes. It's about being a champion. It's about winning. It's about winning the game. That's what you want to do. That's the result of chess, is that you won. And that's what really you're trying to do. That's business. Businesses need to win. They need to get profit. They need to do better. They need to eat, they need to beat their expectations. That's how we get growth. That's how we get budgets. That's how we get our ideas to go to the next level. So just remember, you're a strategic asset, whether you know it or not. These are the three things that we talked about again. You got to get, strategies win championships. Just being cool is not a strategy, and sell your results. So that's all we have. Thank you.